Good morning, and thank you for taking the time to listen to our PowerPoint presentation on the Darden Restaurant Group. This case study was put together by Shelton and Curtis Hines for the Management Principles course at Fort Hays State University. So thank you for joining us, and we hope you find this interesting and educating. Let's take a moment to discuss the things that we'll be talking about in this presentation. The first thing we'll talk about is analyzing the company against Porter's 5 forces framework. The second thing we'll do is analyzing the company's SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The third item we'll be talking about is a major problem the company faced with the fact that it was sued by the employees for unpaid overtime. Then we'll move on to presenting you with 5 possible solutions to the unethical practices of this unpaid overtime. And lastly, we'll discuss a 4-step control process for the solution to the unethical practices above. Now we'll talk about analyzing the company against Porter's 5 forces. The first portion of the analysis talks about competitive rivalry. Darden Restaurant's main competitors are Red Robin Gourmet Burgers, Ruth's Hospitality Group, Bravo Burrito Restaurant Group, and O'Charlie's. If the rivalry among the existing players in an industry is intense, then it will drive down prices and decrease the overall profitability of the industry. Darden Restaurants operates in a very competitive restaurant industry. This competition does take toll on the overall long-term profitability of the organization. So how can Darden Restaurants tackle intense rivalry among the existing competitors in the restaurant industry? Well, first, they can do this by building a sustainable differentiation. They can also do this by building scale so that it can compete better. And lastly, they can do this by collaborating with competitors to increase the market size rather than just competing for the small market. So moving on to the second part of the 5 forces, the supplier power. Almost all the companies in the restaurant industry buy their raw material from numerous suppliers. Suppliers in dominant position can decrease the margins Darden Restaurants can earn in the market. Powerful suppliers in service sector use their negotiating power to extract higher prices from the firms in restaurant fields. The overall impact of higher supplier bargaining power is that it lowers the overall profitability of restaurants. So how can Darden Restaurants tackle bargaining power of suppliers? Well, to start, they can build efficient supply chain with multiple suppliers, not just one. They can also experiment with product designs using different materials so that the prices go up on one raw material, then company can shift to another. They can also develop dedicated suppliers whose business depends on the firm. One of the lessons Darden Restaurants can learn from Walmart and Nike is how these companies developed third-party manufacturers whose business solely depends on them, thus creating a scenario where these third-party manufacturers had significantly less bargaining power compared to Walmart and Nike. So moving on to the third aspect of the 5 forces is the buyer power. Buyers are often a demanding lot. They want to buy the best offerings available by paying the minimum price possible. This puts pressure on Darden Restaurants' profitability in the long run. The smaller and more powerful the customer base is of Darden Restaurants, the higher the bargaining power of the customer and the higher their ability to seek increasing discounts and offers. So how can Darden Restaurants tackle the bargaining power of buyers? They can build a large base of customers. This will be helpful in more than one way. It'll reduce the bargaining power of the buyers, plus it will provide an opportunity to the firm streamline its sales and production process. By rapidly innovating new products, customers often seek discounts and offerings on established products. So if Darden Restaurants keep coming up with new products, then it can limit the bargaining power of the buyers. And lastly, new products will also reduce the defection of existing customers of Darden Restaurants to its competitors. Moving on to the fourth aspect of the 5 forces is the threat of substitution. When a new product or service meets a similar customer need in different ways, industry profitability suffers. For example, services like Dropbox and Google Drive are substitutes to storage hardware drives. The threat of a substitute product or service is high if it offers a value proposition that is uniquely different from present offerings of the industry. So how can Darden restaurants tackle that threat of substitute products? Well, they can do this by being service-oriented rather than just product-oriented. They can also do this by understanding the core need of the customer rather than what the customer is buying. They can also do this by increasing the switching cost for the customer. So moving on to the last aspect of Porter's 5 Forces analysis, the threat of new entry. New entrants in restaurants bring innovation, new ways of doing things, and put pressure on Darden restaurants through lower pricing strategy, reducing cost, and providing new value propositions to the customer. Darden restaurants has to manage all these challenges and build effective barriers to safeguard its competitive edge. So how can Darden restaurants tackle the threat of new entrants? They can do this by innovating new products or services. New products not only bring new customers to the fold, but also give customers a reason to buy Darden restaurants products. They also do this by building economies of scale so that it can lower the fixed cost per unit. They also can build capacities and spending money on research and development. New entrants are less likely to enter a dynamic industry where the established players, such as Darden restaurants, keep defining the standards regularly. It significantly reduces the window of extraordinary profits for the new firms, thus discouraging new players in the industry. So by analyzing all the 5 competitive forces, Darden restaurant strategists can gain a complete picture of what impacts the profitability of the organization in restaurants industry. They can identify game-changing trends early on and can swiftly respond to exploit the emerging opportunity. By understanding the Porter 5 forces in great detail, Darden restaurants managers can shape those forces in their favor. Now let's take a moment to analyze Darden restaurants using the SWOT analysis. First, we're going to talk about the company's strengths. The first being that Darden uses high-quality catering to provide customers with great service. Darden also has a great working relationship with vendors, and what this does is offers high-quality food and ingredients at its restaurants. The third thing is Darden Restaurants has highly motivated working staff that also provide great customer service. Darden Restaurant also caters to all customers. The food quality and services is affordable for anyone. And lastly, this creates loyal customers because of the great service and their food quality. Now let's talk about Darden's weaknesses. One of the weaknesses is that they underpay their employees. That led to the lawsuit that we'll talk about. Oftentimes, the wait times at the restaurants can be lengthy. You may wait over half an hour, and the hospitality for that can be better by being proactive in getting them seated. The third thing is management needs more diversity, which will cause fewer turnovers. Another weakness is to reduce the wait time for customers. And lastly, you would want to seat tables faster during the peak hours. This would help reduce the wait time. Now let's talk about their opportunities. With the growing market, Darden offers the opportunity to join their business. They only seek qualified individuals for franchises. Increase sales by expanding outside of the United States, offering full-service restaurants abroad. Another opportunity is the ability to expand business opportunities by providing the Olive Garden dressing and shredded cheese in Sam's Club for customers. And lastly, open up international franchising. Now let's talk about the threats that Darden faces. The first thing is competition from other restaurants, whether big or small. There's always going to be a percentage of losing loyal customers. The second threat is losing quality vendors to other competition if the competitor offers more money. Money certainly can persuade any vendor to seek other opportunities. The third thing is with the struggling economy, any restaurant, especially Darden, can lose customers. When any customer goes through a financial change, it can have a dramatic impact on their sales. And the last is the scarcity of resources like fish, lobster, and caviar. Now we'll talk about a managerial problem. In 2014, Darden Restaurants was sued by former employees for being forced to work unpaid overtime. The restaurant group was sued by its employees for working overtime without compensation. The restaurants that were part of the lawsuit included Capitol Grill, Longhorn Steakhouse, Olive Garden, and Red Lobster. The lawsuit was filed on behalf of two main employees, Amanda Mathis and James Hamilton. Amanda was a Florida resident and former server at several Longhorn Steakhouse locations. James was a Virginia resident and former Olive Garden server in Georgia. In their lawsuit, the plaintiffs alleged that servers such as themselves were paid less than the minimum wage and were not compensated for the time they were required to work off the clock. The lawsuit also contends that Darden violated the Fair Labor Standards Act by paying many of its servers below the minimum wage by federal law, which can be as low as $2.13 an hour for tipped workers and $7.25 an hour for non-tipped workers. It also alleges that servers were required to work off the clock at the beginning and the end of their shift without compensation. Now let's talk about 5 possible solutions. The first solution would be to potentially hire a backer or bus person to wrap silverware and also assist with side work. This would cut down on unnecessary overtime by servers by having the additional help to do side tasks. The second may sound funny, but just pay the overtime. The third is have another server cover the side work if another server has reached their overtime limit. The fourth, an exempt employee such as a dining room manager could also assist with side work to avoid paying the overtime. And the fifth would be to discipline managers for allowing the unspoken quote-unquote don't ask, don't tell situation where employees implicitly know they are expected to work more than 40 hours without the overtime pay. Now we've talked about our possible solutions. Let's go with the solution of hiring a backer or bus personnel to assist the servers. With doing this, we'll want to do a 4-step control process. The first part is to establish performance objectives and standards. The performance standard may sound crazy, but each backer essentially performs the duties of 6 servers. The second is to measure the actual performance. Performance is measured by the cleanliness of the server station, side duties, and customer drink refills, and no unpaid overtime. The third is to compare actual performance. Comparing actual performance with standards, we would need to review the backer every 3 months or 90 days for the first year to make sure that they're meeting the standards and the servers are no longer working before or after with absolutely no unpaid overtime. The standards would also be qualitative to improve motivational levels of the employee. And the fourth step would be to take necessary action. We would need to decide how many backers are needed per shift, then advertise the positions on social media or online, and give incentives to current employees for referrals that stay with the company at least 6 months. Now let's wrap up with the conclusion. Employees of Darden restaurants were forced to work unpaid overtime that led to a lawsuit. We've talked about 5 possible solutions to resolve the issue. The first being to hire a backer to assist the servers. Second, pay the overtime. Third, have another server assist with duties. Fourth, an exempt employee such as a manager fill in the gaps. And lastly, discipline the managers for the unpaid overtime. We chose the first solution to hire backers to assist the servers because this solution is the most qualitative and will improve the overall morale of the employees. We used the 4-step control process to set the performance standard for the position, then set the measurement in place and review the backer every 3 months for the first year. We then offered present employees incentive for referrals and post the job listing on social media. We want to thank you for taking the time to review our PowerPoint and have a good rest of your semester.